Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, gentlemen. This has been a great discussion this morning, and I hope that, Mr. Chairman, we can continue and not just discuss it, but actually see some actions behind the words. So I'm really encouraged about what we're touching upon today. But I would like to get your thoughts on ISIS in Southeast Asia, because I do think it's something that we haven't spent a lot of time focusing on. We're not talking about it nearly enough. And Islamic extremist groups in Southeast Asia, like the Abu Sayyaf group, they are all coming together under the flag of ISIS, and it's a bit concerning. Earlier this year, both General Dunford and Secretary Carter agreed on my assessment of ISIS in the region, and they shared those concerns as well. But since that time, ISIS-linked groups have carried out a number of attacks. Just last week, we saw an attack against the Philippine president's security detail, and we saw a bombing near the U.S. Embassy. So continuing escalation of violence in that area by those extremist groups. And Mr. Brumley, I'd like to start with you because you did mention the rebalance towards the Pacific. And you've mentioned that rebalance, and I think when that first started, the focus was very much on China and maybe North Korea, some of those aspects. But now we have ISIS engaging heavily in the Philippines. You spoke about the Marines in Darwin and other activities. Can you talk a little bit about what you think our administration, the incoming administration, should do to really address this rising threat of ISIS in Southeast Asia?
Sure. Thank you, Senator. I would just say we saw this before, in 2001, 2002, terrorist groups in the region that have their own sort of particular interests as it pertains to the countries in which they operate. I mean, I think there's a lot of branding going on, and we saw in after 9/11 a lot of terrorist groups around the world, but somehow now they're affiliated with Al Qaeda, and that gave them some sort of I guess marketing prowess, and it doesn't surprise me that we're seeing that again with ISIS. But I would just say, from a DoD perspective, one of the ways I think our posture in the region ought to be focused on maintaining the regional order. And we need to be able to prepare to go toe-to-toe with countries and threats. I'm worried about China, I'm worried about North Korea, and the like. But one of the tangible second-order benefits that we get from forward deploying our troops and capabilities overseas is we have that daily connectivity and we have that daily deterrent prowess in places around the region. One of the debates that you see and hear inside the Pentagon, or one of the debates that we had inside the Pentagon as it pertains to, say, the Marines in Darwin, for instance, is, you start to break apart these larger entities like a Marine Air Ground Task Force, for instance, and you start to put a company here in the southern Philippines and put a task force of some kind in Australia. And there's a trade-off between doing that, which gives you that kind of daily interaction with local communities, the ability to do counterterrorism operations, for instance. But there is some risk that it becomes more difficult to quickly bring those capabilities back together for a larger threat, responding to a larger threat. And that's the balance that DoD, particularly OSD, has to grapple with every day. And I would just encourage the committee, as you think about the Defense Strategy Review, what used to be the QDR that the next administration will do next year, that you're very aggressive with them in articulating, what you want to see out of the strategy, classified briefings for all these factors, and making sure that all these different constituent elements are part of that strategy. And it's not just a public relations document, which is what QDRs, I think, unfortunately, have tended to evolve into, which is part of the reason the committee took its action it did to make the QDR Defense Strategy Review with a classified component.
Right. Very good, thank you. And General Keane, could you talk a little bit more about militarily what we could be doing in that region and the use of forces?
Yeah, absolutely. And ISIS has expanded into 35 countries, and we don't really have a strategy to deal with any of that. We're focused on the territory that they took, certainly in Iraq and Syria. And I'm not saying that's not appropriate. That should be a priority. But commensurate with that priority, we should be addressing these other areas as well. And a lot of the identification with ISIS is aspirational, but they also have affiliates in these countries. This is one of them. And with an affiliate, they actually sign a document together to abide by certain ISIS principles and rules. And in some cases, they direct, some cases they provide aid, but in most cases, there's no direction. And that's largely the case here. But I believe what the United States can do with its allies is that, we've been at war with organizations like this now for 15 years, and our reservoir of knowledge and capability here is pretty significant. And it far exceeds anybody else in the world, but we have allies that are participating with us. There's much we can do with them in sharing intelligence and helping them with training and also helping them with technology, not expensive technology, but things that can truly make a difference, with those troops. And I don't think we necessarily have to be directly involved in fighting these forces ourselves, but aiding and supporting these forces and having a strategy to do that and lining up some priorities for ourselves, because we have limited amount of resources, but make some choices, based on what that threat is and what it may be, its implications for the region could help guide us to what those priorities should be.
I appreciate your input. Thank you, Mr. Chair.